All right, we have to talk. Allegories do not require intention, meaning the person writing the story does not have to intend for something to be taken as an allegory for it to, in fact, be taken that way. Subtext in reading has always been a thing, and a lot of people can see themselves in characters and stories in books, in comic books, movies, TV shows, without it ever being implicitly stated. And this seems to be the argument that's going around about Stan Lee and the intention when creating the original X-Men, the original 5 X-Men, on whether or not it was made as an allegory towards anything in present day. And that argument is very reductive because obviously it does not intend to be applied to what is happening right now, or even what was happening in the 80s, considering the era that those characters were created. A lot of YouTube content creators are taking sound bites from Stan Lee and trying to apply it to their argument in a continued effort to demean and diminish marginalized representation in media. Here's a good example. This is from Eric July, and this is a clip that he was listening to. It was shared over on X, Twitter, and we're going to take a listen to it.
Listen in directly to Stan Lee's words here. Check this out right here. Let's listen in.
I mean, there are things like that that people catch that you may not have even known that you were putting in there. But
you
obviously...
are so right. Now take the X-Men. I was just originally trying to get an interesting group of characters with interesting powers, and I thought it would make it twice as interesting if the public really didn't like them that much. And if they had to worry about their reception by the outside world, little by little, I began getting mail saying how great it is that I'm doing these stories about bigotry and the evils of bigotry and so forth, and race hatred. And I guess I was doing that. And I guess I was doing that. But I was doing it subconsciously. That wasn't the main purpose.
So that it goes, of course, in line that he's made regarding the X-Men. He created them really out of laziness.
Now, if you listen to that clip, you can tell from Stan Lee's point of view, he did not intend to create them with those things in mind initially. We're talking about the original 5 X-Men: Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Beast, Angel, and Iceman. And if you look back then, yeah, you could see that during that period in time, maybe he was just trying to make another team of characters like the Fantastic Four that ended up not being well received. And that group of heroes, that comic book was actually canceled in 1970 due to low sales. But we'll talk about more of that in a moment. Let's listen to another clip from Stan Lee.
Then I thought it might be fun to get an analogy with the way some people are picked on by bigots and are persecuted by bigots. I thought, here are characters who are going to look different, who are going to have certain strange powers. What if the human race is afraid of them, hates them perhaps, and prosecutes them, torments them? What if the evil mutants resent the fact that the human race doesn't trust them, and they want to strike back, and they feel they are homo superior as opposed to the human beings who are homo sapiens? However, the good mutants feel we've got to learn to coexist with the human race. We've got to help them and show them that they're wrong about distrusting people who are different than they are. And suddenly I became really fascinated by this because I could see there was such a parallel between things that were happening in society and these stories that we were trying to write. And that's how it all happened.
So which one of those clips are accurate? Which one of those things speaks to the question that's being asked on whether or not the X-Men represents some sort of allegory towards marginalization or towards bigotry? I mean, Stan literally said bigotry in that clip that I just showed you. He talked about how people were being treated differently because of who they are in that clip that I just showed you. But it's funny because the clip that Eric shared didn't say anything about that. It's almost like if you dig long enough, listening to Stan Lee talk, you're going to find him giving different stories and different ideas and different things that may have come into play when he was creating these characters. That's quintessential Stan Lee when he talks about anything. There's no disrespect to him. He's a genius, but he said different stuff over the years when it comes to why he created the original OG 5 X-Men. These content creators either do not fundamentally understand how the X-Men represent marginalized minority groups in the world, or they're being completely disingenuous and misrepresenting it to create their own narrative to, again, diminish and demean marginalized communities, specifically gay, queer people, and women. And before we move on from Stan Lee, I just want to remind everybody that there's several iterations of Stan's soapbox where he talks about racism, bigotry, and intolerance. This isn't a new thing for him. It wasn't like Stan was some alt-right conservative guy who didn't care about, helping society. Even if he didn't explicitly create the X-Men for that reason, which depending on which interview you talk to Stan Lee from, it changes. Even if he didn't, he never intended for them to be some anti-progressive team. That was never what he did when he made these characters. But allegories aside, there is no doubt that the original X-Men were a civil rights story. It was about people who were different than everybody else, who had to deal with struggles and discrimination and being treated awful by the general public. It is a civil rights story, whether you want to see it as an allegory to anything in the real world or not. The more you know. Also, when people say the X-Men have always been progressive, they're probably talking about the 1975 retooling of the X-Men franchise. After it was canceled in 1970, they took 5 years off and they came back in 1975 with a brand new version of the team and a brand new story with a new writer and a new artist. So Len Wein and Dave Cockrum came up with this new team, this new design for the X-Men that was very diverse, extremely diverse, considering the original 5 X-Men. If you were to take that team today and change that, people would be screaming at how completely different the new X-Men team was from the old X-Men team. We're talking about taking a team of 5 white characters, 4 men and 1 woman, and changing it into this team, this extremely diverse team. We have a Russian character, we have a black woman from Africa, we have a Native American, we have a German guy who looks like a demon but's also extremely Christian, we have a Japanese character, a Canadian character, and a character from Ireland. All of these characters together on one team had never been done before. Characters, these diverse working together had never been a thing in comics. And it was so popular, matter of fact, massively popular, that Len Wein, who had written this story, couldn't continue writing it. He had too many other duties going on at the time. And so they passed it off to Chris Claremont. And that would begin the era of X-Men, the storylines and all of the great things that we remember, the things that inspired everything we love about the 90s X-Men came from this era of the X-Men, not the OG era, not the one that these guys keep going back to and trying to say, oh, this doesn't represent diversity. Well, this does. Matter of fact, Chris Claremont, the prolific writer for the X-Men, has done several interviews talking in details about intention and allegories and things of that nature. Here in an interview with Empire, they ask him, a major theme of your X-Men stories was using mutants as metaphors for other persecuted groups. Where did that idea come from? He responded like this: I went to Israel for 2 months in 1970 and worked on a kibbutz. It affected me on levels that I hadn't anticipated, working on a daily basis with people who were actual survivors of the Holocaust. You'd see military patrols going by every day. We would have armed volunteers walking around the property all night. It brought home international conflicts on a very personal level. So as you can see, he was taking things personally in his life and injecting them into the stories he was writing. Now, a lot of people in that negative space, in the Griff Spear and the anti-YouTube, ChudTube area, they would say that would be a self-insert. You're inserting yourself into your stories. But the greatest stories from comic book creators usually come from something that did personally affect them in their lives. And Chris Claremont is a big proponent of taking these things and putting them in stories and letting readers take those things, regardless of the intention, and create their own allegory, see themselves in these stories that he is writing. Matter of fact, at FlameCon, he was asked about this implicitly with the stuff that he was writing, and this is what he had to say. The Comics Code tried to restrict everything, Claremont said, in the self-regulating system for censoring comic books. But with a certain measure of visual subtlety and ambiguity, you could actually achieve everything you wanted. In fact, Claremont spoke at length about the way his writing often circled pressing social issues while staying within the constraints of mainstream publication. He cited an issue of the New Mutants that followed Larry, a young male mutant arriving at a new school. He feels uneasy given the anti-mutie sentiment that greets him there and tragically takes his own life. Addressing Larry's school shortly thereafter, one of the X-Men, Kitty Pryde, who met Larry the night before this happened, voices a heartfelt plea on behalf of teenagers like him. He thought if people knew the truth, they'd stop seeing him and only see the label, the brand, his personal scarlet letter, she says, holding back tears. So he hid the truth and lived in terror of being discovered. Now, despite reading like something we would now see on social media, Larry's story was published on November 1986 and never explicitly addressed itself to gay readers. But it's no surprise, Claremont added, that gay people could look at it and find resonance in terms of who they are and what they were standing for. And I want to reiterate, Claremont has no issue with subtext and allegories. Even if they weren't intended, he has never had a problem with it. And just like Stan Lee, he's talked quite openly about injustice and bigotry and things like that. We're not even going to get into God Loves Man Kills, which is one of the most socially conscious comic books that Marvel has ever created. And sadly, you could take the issues from that comic book and apply it to modern times. And I want to circle back to all this drama about Morph being a non-binary character in the X-Men 97 animated series, which kind of sparked a lot of this conversation. So we don't know what that's going to look like on the show. We have no idea how Morph is going to be applied as a non-binary character in X-Men 97. It could be something as simple as him being addressed by they pronouns, or it could be something like him mentioning it in a story with one of his best friends on the team, which will be Wolverine, according to the series. People are saying that this is new for the X-Men. It's something different. It's something wild. I want to address you and point out that North Star, who is the first openly gay character in the history of Marvel Comics, the first one, was introduced in the X-Men in issue 120 of the X-Men back in 1979, and came out as a gay man in 1992. All of this happened prior to him being featured in the animated series, in the X-Men animated series, after he was an openly gay character, which I would assume that he would be a gay character in the series as well. All of that happened prior to all of this drama about Morph. I also think it's kind of stupid that people who are arguing about the fact that a non-binary character in the X-Men would be too sexual for children to watch, but then at the same time, we have channel after channel, man after man complaining that Rogue isn't sexy enough anymore for the cartoon, which has already been disproven. People have already gone back and found panels from the series in the 90s where her butt looks flat, just like it does in the updated cartoon. But even so, it's just fucking weird that a lot of these guys out here are complaining about the sexuality of Rogue not being present in the 90s updated cartoon, but then Morph being non-binary, something that's totally not sexual at all, being too sexual for a children's cartoon. Look, I just want to rope back around to this idea of allegories and intention and just drive this home because I think it's very, very important. Allegories do not have to be intended. They just don't. This is something that happens in subtext of writing. Sometimes it's subconscious. It doesn't matter what the intention was when somebody's reading something or consuming art of any kind. You can create that narrative for yourself in your head and draw the lines wherever you want to draw them. And we're talking about the X-Men, whether or not they were implicitly talking about women, any particular minorities, whether it be gay people or people of color, whatever, they were still fighting for civil rights as mutants in their stories, starting back with the OG team. So the fact that they were fighting for civil rights, regardless of what the intention was or whether it was an actual writing allegory, people could see themselves in those stories. And that's important. And that's what makes good storytelling. That's why a lot of this very extreme alt-right conservative hate content that's made in spite will never, ever achieve the same things that these other writers have achieved with comic books. And you can argue against representation, but the fact of the matter is, if you're arguing against the fact that people want to see themselves in stories because of somebody changing a character that's traditionally white to a black character, or a man to a woman, or a straight to a gay character, you are arguing for representation while arguing against representation. You're arguing for the thing that you say you don't stand for. If you truly believe that representation is not important at all, and it's just about the stories, and it's just about the writing, it's just about the characters, then you would not be arguing about changes to characters. You would let them stand on their own. You would let it come out, and it would either be a success or it wouldn't be. You would not astroturf. You would not fight so hard to keep it from happening, because that seems like you're worried that the representation that was happening before would be shifting to other people that are underrepresented. So you're actually arguing for representation when you're arguing against diversity.